Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeforum, a world that just might work. I'll be speaking today with Steve SCHMIDT, political strategist, known for his influential roles in Republican political campaigns, and over the past few years, his articulate, full-throated, and damning criticism of the Republican Party as taken over by Donald Trump. And to learn more, you can go to steveschmidt.substack.com, and that's Steve S-T-E-V-E Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T, steveschmidt.substack.com, or The Warning with Steve SCHMIDT on YouTube. So you can follow him either one of those ways. On Freeforum, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. Let me make a few personal political and cultural observations before I bring Steve in. I noticed in preparing for this that I find it difficult to watch Donald Trump, though I feel I have to. I can tolerate photos. It gets a little worse when I hear his voice. But the revulsion I feel at the sight of him in action is actually palpable. I recorded the roundtable he did with Governor Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass after he toured the destructive fires in the Palisades, and I was planning to watch it in preparation for this conversation. But 2 or 3 times I just found, let's do something else. And so I ended up, I haven't watched it. And I was asking myself, what's going on? And I have watched him with disgust, anger, something akin to disbelief, but it's not really disbelief because you know that this is the reality we face. But only recently, really since the election, do I also feel some fear. I ask myself, why do I react so viscerally? And I think there's at least 3 reasons. One, I respond with the disgust that filmmakers hope we respond to their most disturbing, horrifying characters. And although I hate misuse of the word literally, I literally believe Donald Trump is the personification of evil. That's evil incarnate. Man's inhumanity to man made man. In other words, when I look at him, I see all the worst emotions and impulses that humans suffer, and he just embodies that. And then second, add to that the power that he gains when people in institutions respond to him out of fear. Their fear of retaliation overrides any and all other considerations. One by one, they tell themselves, my submission isn't a big deal. I've done the cost-benefit analysis. But added together, it's beginning to feel to me like we're further along that path that we've kind of talked about for a few years, that the Germans trod in their gradual submission to Nazism. And I think we're further along as I watch the news, especially since his election, than I thought we would be. And finally, I think it's deeply upsetting that the repulsion that I feel has the opposite effect on so many millions of my fellow Americans, and not just attraction, but with enormous intensity. And I believe the energy of that identification and that devotion feels like a potent and a dangerous force. And I think privately, he wouldn't even take offense at being seen as the personification of evil. He'd probably figure out, how can I do more? And that makes me think, what if at some point he feels like he has to do more? He's just not getting the same reaction anymore. He's not getting all the attention he did. It's the WWE or the UFC. And what will he have to do then to take things up a notch? And it occurred to me, we may have dodged a bullet, if you will, because the assassination attempt gave him something new, some new persona, a new story, without him having to actually go out and do something more extreme to get that attention. Another thought I have is that this election turned on gender issues to some extent, but it's not the gender issues that were showing up in the Republican ads. It's not about trans. That's a that's an infinitesimal blip in the population, but a good trigger point for people. But the gender issues that matter are the ones that it seems young men and older men, but I think really younger men feel, and that's just not in the United States. I saw a poll taken in England in the last few days, or at least the news of it came out in the last few days, and what it said about young men in England was at least as disturbing. And it strikes me that one of the things that Trump has become a personification of as well is getting away with it. And if you look at the immunity decision and you look at the actions that he proposed, the actions he's taking, it very much is a what can I get away with? But we saw this before when Hillary asked him about not paying taxes because I'm smart, grab him by the pussy, multiple chargeable offenses. What can I get away with? I think this has a real appeal to young men. And it's not just Trump. Mitch McConnell with his SCOTUS Supreme Court actions, Alito and Thomas with their bribes, the 6-3 court overturning precedent, the darkest actions of police and border patrol, corporations now backing out of their climate pledges, or even a whole society sort of saying, what can we get away with if we just ignore climate change? And I think this getting away with it is a very insidious and powerful thing that breaks trust and one by one breaks society. Steve Schmidt is a political strategist and a media commentator. As I said, he's known for his roles in the Republican political campaigns. He was campaign strategist for California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, for George W. Bush's 2004 re-election campaign, and for Senator John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign. He's a co-founder of the Lincoln Project, a super PAC that raised nearly $100 million to campaign against Donald Trump. He spent 10 years as a political analyst at MSNBC. He's currently a commentator on Script News. And as I said, he is the founder and voice of The Warning on Substack and YouTube. Welcome, Steve Schmidt, to Free Forum, a world that just might work.
Thank you, Terrence. Thank you for having me.
And let me tell people we're recording this conversation Tuesday, January 28th. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the ideas and the work we talk about. So I laid out some of the roles you've held and so on, but can you tell us a bit in your words how you see your path to the work you do today, the life you lead? And feel free to go way back, mentors, turning points, moments of decision. We've got an hour, and I want people to get a sense of who you are before we launch into, our big thoughts.
Well, I grew up in North Plainfield, New Jersey. I was born in 1970 in a blue-collar town 25 miles from New York City. I was the first person on my father's side of the family to go to college. He was a telephone company worker who rose in the company ranks with his own grit and determination, and played a very significant role for an extended period of time at the end of his career while still a young guy in his mid-50s on the Ground Zero site after the 9/11 terror attacks, helping to mitigate the environmental catastrophe and restore phone service, which was key to making sure that the financial markets were able to open. And so he retired with my mom as a school teacher to New Hampshire. It's where my sister lives. She's a therapist. And he went into politics in his retirement in the New Hampshire legislature, and has retired from that. I have spent a lot of my career working in politics, but started a company or two along the way. I've done a lot of crisis management work. I laugh when you read about a lot of these people you might see popping up in New York Times stories about I'm a crisis management pro in Hollywood and I'll destroy you and we can all destroy everybody. You know, this Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni suit. I mean, I did the type of work where when the Fukushima nuclear reactor melted down, advised GE and the CEO through the crisis, you know, United Airlines in different situations, Tom Brady through Deflategate. Um, and then always back to politics. To give it a sense, I guess, about who I am. And, you know, it's an interesting question in this day and age because no one ever asks you to talk about who you are, but there's a lot of people who try to impose on you who they believe you are, or worse, who they are, while lashing out in acts of projection. I worked in the Bush White House. I ran two Supreme Court confirmations. I was one of the top strategists on the reelection campaign. I did John McCain's campaign. I was a volunteer all the way throughout it. You know, I talked in later years, and I think when you look at the trust apocalypse, you know, in this moment, you know, I had the experience, still have the experience. You know, there'll be people who responded to this, hey, you know, Steve Schmidt picked Sarah Palin to be the vice president. Steve Schmidt was a 36-year-old political aide. John McCain was a 72-year-old senior senator and the Republican nominee. The person who picked Sarah Palin was John McCain. I was deeply distracted by the attempt, the suicide attempt of his long-term mistress, who he did favors for, a lobbyist, and corrupt acts as he was, you know, chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. And I think it's important, and I've talked about this when we look at people. You know, John would have been the first to tell you he wasn't a saint, didn't want to be sanctified, beatified in any way, shape, or form. You know, people give in to temptation, and he gave in to a specific type, and the point of that wasn't to disparage the greatness of the things that he did, which can't be torn down, but rather to point out that after many years, even great people stumble, and that we have to appreciate them in their full context. But I did not pick Sarah Palin, for example, to be the vice president, but I was present there. When that campaign ended, I did, and during it, I partook in my first bit of activism, I suppose. You're a big deal if you're running a presidential campaign at the conventions. You're going to be feted. Um, and I didn't go to any events except for one, which was to speak to the gay group, the Log Cabin Republicans, my only public appearance. I did that with a consciousness of purpose. And when the campaign ended, first major speech I ever gave was to call for the legalization of gay marriage. I was one of the top strategists for the ACLU and the marriage equality campaigns. I talked about marriage equality, fought for marriage equality, fought for marriage equality years before Barack Obama was in support of marriage equality. But of course, it's not a race. There's no ribbon, but I was proud to stand up for other people's rights and also to warn from the very earliest days about the rise of the Tea Party, which I have done consistently without contradiction a single time between 2009 through today. There is a episode of Wolf Blitzer interviewing Donald Trump from 2012 that people can go and find. And that shows Donald Trump calling me a loser because I said that Donald Trump was the head clown in a Republican clown car that was racing downhill or something like that. So I've been outspoken in my warnings, and I was on Morning Joe, I believe, the first person on television in America when everyone said he was a clown and joke to say he could win. I think I was consistently the first person to say he was winning. I said publicly in September of 2020 that there would be violence when he denied the result of an election. I did not get in line behind the Joe Biden gaslighting that has given us Donald Trump. I walked out with Dean Phillips, and I did so because in order to preserve democracy, it must be practiced. And the shouting down and the intimidation and the steamrolling and gaslighting that took place on, for example, Morning Joe, where Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski looked their audience in the eye, and Joe Scarborough literally said, "Fuck you. If you don't believe this is the best version of Joe Biden ever, intellectually," so on and so forth. And so we have to appreciate how it is we came to this low moment where Trump wins 49.9% of the vote, because what has not been attempted is an offering of something better. And when you compete in an Olympics of cynicism, the most cynical motherfucker will win. And that's Donald Trump. And it will always be Donald Trump. It has been Donald Trump. And it will continue to be Donald Trump. And so what I would say is I find Donald Trump repugnant also. And I listened to your monologue at the beginning, but I got to tell you, I got room for some anger at Karen Bass. And there's a truth. You arrange the right combination of imbeciles into positions of responsibility, they have every capacity to burn down a city. And they did. And so when we look at the ecosystem, it is polluted.
Yeah.
And I have done my best to say very squarely that you're not served, the people hearing this, by a fandom towards power, towards politicians. You're not in the room where it happens. The old saying at the poker table, if you don't know who the mark is, it's you. Right? So if you don't know who's on your side in a very specific sense, other than being able to identify with a magic letter next to their name that denotes a political affiliation, you're the mark. And so here we are. And what I've tried to do is to be somebody who tells the truth, that takes a stand, that refuses to bend, and can contextualize what's happening by being able to explain cogently what has happened and connect on a continuum, because that is how life unfolds. The journey that has gone on, that we have all gone down together over the last 10 years, connected by a very deep, true reality, which is this. We're a young country. As of the beginning of the year, John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, born in 1791 when there were 13 states, had a living grandson. And that the world that we are witnessing in what seems like an ending is in fact now just unfurling beyond the edge of the vision of the visionaries and architects who imagined it into existence in a war that civilization barely survived, where freedom barely triumphed against slavery. And now we watch an Elon Musk killer salute, and people tell you that's not what it is, and you didn't see it if you saw it. And if you did see it, it didn't mean what you know it means. And if you think it means what you know it means, then you're crazy. And so all of this is part of a great drama. And within it, I hope to be one of the storytellers that can explain it and be on the side of the people and somebody who will confront power when they abuse that power to abuse the people. And it's a privilege to have a platform to be able to do that. At age 54, I'd say in the middle hours of a long journey in American life.
And let me just ask, in that, and thank you for all of that. In that evolution of your own perspective and your own relationships to the party system and so on, is most of what happened that the Republican Party left you, but what was it that originally brought you to the Republican Party? And is it now that whatever those issues were have diminished in relationship to the very essence of democracy?
The Republican Party that I was attracted to was the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. I have a lot of people on my platform, if you say the words Ronald Reagan, will go nuts.
Oh,
and the announcement saying Ronald Reagan is the architect and font of all evil in the world. And what I would say to those people is that, of course, they're entitled to their opinion, but they are very deeply out of touch with American sentiment. Ronald Reagan was reelected, winning 49 states, 62% of the vote. And I think one of the most egregious and offensive lies in American politics, and it's a partisan lie, is that Reaganism and Trumpism are connected when in fact they're oppositional to one another. And if you look at what is on Ronald Reagan's tombstone, and to quote that in part is a compass, right, a guide out of this mess. But the optimism and the era that I grew up in really existed from 1980 until 2001. And during that time, you had 12 years of a Republican president, C's, Reagan and Bush, and 8 years of Bill Clinton. And we come to the millennium in a position of unparalleled power at an age of profound opportunity and optimism in the country, where people are writing books about it's the end of history. And September 11th happens. The truth of the matter is that we have warped the meaning of politeness. George W. Politeness.
Oh.
Right, the meaning of the word politeness. George W. Bush, right, a great tragedy has unfolded this week of Trump in his first week of office. Trump has cut off funding for the president's AIDS relief plan in Africa. Now, George W. Bush did this. right? And he did this in all of our names, right? The president's emergency plan for AIDS relief in Africa. Guy named Mike Gerson, this is a real life story, walked into the Oval Office. This is what can happen there. And put aside the bullshit with the R and the D next to your name. Mike Gerson was a devout, passed away too young in the last year or two. He was a devout evangelical Christian. There were no black people necessarily in the Oval Office when he said it. I think it was small. It was two white guys. And he said, "You have the power to cure AIDS in Africa." And he did it. Saved 25 million human lives. A gift canceled by Trump from the people of the United States of America.
You mean in the name of?
In the name of. It's our gift given by our president. Right? We went in an instant last week from "we're here to save you" to "fuck you, we're leaving." Now, George Bush also started two wars, and he lost both of those wars. And one of those wars continued on for 20 years, and that war was a fantasy about the spread of democracy, around which he remained silent as it was threatened at home. And the other war was fought over weapons that didn't exist.
That's right.
And broke trust in government and trust in media and trust everywhere.
And by the way, let me jump in for a sec. Steve, I think, because I've looked at that moment, I think also the subprime crisis.
Of course.
Broke trust in the experts, broke trust. We made our bets on Afghanistan, Iraq, and Wall Street. And what were we left with? People dying overseas, people killing people in the name of America overseas, and a crash here. And I think the disintegration of trust in the establishment, the experts, all of that really took place. And I've listened to enough and read enough of your stuff to know that I think I'm going to take this in a direction. FDR saved capitalism from itself.
Saved capitalism and he saved democracy. Absolutely.
And Theodore Roosevelt, in a sense, did the same thing in the progressive era. And 2008 presented an opportunity to do the same thing. And we would be having an entirely different conversation if Barack Obama and that administration had seen that it seems like, how did they not do that, except that they'd fallen in love with their funders? But you can pick up the ball there. But I do think that end of the Bush administration is the moment when trust is gone.
Well, the Obama administration represents the rise of a coalition that has fallen apart and a offer of technocratic, competent governance through the agencies of the Democratic Party. And so let's look at a state that I deeply love. I'm not a California basher. I've lived in California for a good many of the last 20 years. I've been here
since 75.
I've been to every nook and cranny on a ski or a snowmobile or a four-wheeler or hiking, and in the oceans, in the waters. I love it. I know its history. I elected in my career a governor of California who was ready for the big one 100% of the time, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, the state today, right, did not function like this even a short time ago. Just didn't. And it's so important for the Democratic Party not to pretend that it did, because there was fundamentally on an offer in this an offer on the table in this election, right? And it was direct, implied. But anybody who doesn't think this is a thing is nuts. It was basically, do you want the country to be governed like California, or the crazy Trump guy? And country said crazy Trump guy. Uh,
Okay. Okay.
right?
Yeah, I can't.
And
I can't
have
say,
no
just a second, Steve. I can't say you're entirely wrong, but I think in the bucket full of reasons and the bucket full of analysis, it's just a piece. Go ahead.
If you're going to be the governing party, and I think that this is a terrible aspect of participation trophy society. This is important for Democrats to understand what I'm about to say here. Okay? Life's not fair. If you're the party that says government is the solution to these things, you better deliver the service. Because the failure to deliver the service creates rage. And that rage manifests itself in a movement to burn down the incompetency. And my point is, everybody put down the crack pipe on this. California doesn't function like Denmark. Doesn't function like Norway.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't do the basics at the highest cost point in the country. And because of that, there's going to be a political revolution in California. And because of that, there's going to be green shoots of reform for the Democratic Party, which will be reborn out of the reform movement that's going to come out of the greatest national disaster in American history from California. Because the donor class at Democratic Party in Los Angeles is very distracted right now, but they're not going to fund Chuck Schumer's $300 million boondoggle and burn another $300 million in the next election cycle ineffectively. No one's going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so the reality is a Democratic Party's become a loser party with a loser ideology run by losers that do not represent the American people in such a profound sense that Donald Trump was able to win. And unless and until magnitude of that failure, that defeat is grappled with, and the dishonesty,
I know,
which fueled it, then you'll have President Vance in 4 years. Lest anybody think that Donald Trump is going to be in there for a third term. He won't. But you'll have a J.D. Vance.
Yeah. This is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking today with Steve Schmidt, political strategist in Republican presidential campaigns, who over the last few years has become an articulate, full-throated, and damning critic of the Republican Party as taken over by Trump. To learn more, go to steveschmidt.substack.com or The Warning with Steve Schmidt on YouTube. So, I mean, what I see is that all is true if you look at the numbers, but I think you and I both say, and you made it very clear, and I made it clear on the air, Biden should have dropped out and kept his promise to be a bridge to the next generation. There should have been primaries, and primaries would have revealed, one, that this was another change election. And it is my belief that in this era of social media and echo chambers, every election is going to be a change election. It is so much easier to be against than it is to be for. And so the primaries would have revealed that sentiment even among Democrats. All those people that they woke up on the day after election day and said, wait, how did those folks in New York vote for Trump? How did those blacks vote for Trump? Primaries would have revealed that that was going to happen. And we would not have ended up with an incumbent. And whoever was for Biden to drop out, for the primaries to happen, for a non-incumbent to be the candidate who would still have been competent enough to have wiped Trump's butt in the debate, and you'd have had one old guy against a younger, more vibrant on top of it. And I think all of what you say about the Democrats being a loser party, listen, after every election, Steve, I say if this were any other business, I'd hire another firm. Right? If I had a marketing firm that failed me like the Democrats do every time, or an ad agency, or a doctor, I'd change. Yeah. And we're just in this winner-take-all two-party system, so I don't. But I don't think, I think a non-incumbent who was any good at all, I think this would have been a very different election.
Let's talk about the rottenness that wrought this. I knew all that was going to happen without there being any primaries, which was always a corrupt act. And Joe Biden used Donald Trump as a prop like Voldemort.
Absolutely.
As the rationale to break his promise under the lie that only Biden could beat Trump, and the entirety of the party leadership went along with it. And you got guys like Joe Scarborough making history, being the, hey, to your audience, F you. And then he's the first guy to the Berghof to kiss Hitler's ass 3 hours after he takes power. Journalism, right? You got Jim Acosta kicked off the air of CNN. But all of this cynicism, let's not pretend that it's derivative of Donald Trump as opposed to the buoy, to what lifts Donald Trump. And so here we are. What defeats this in the end is an offering of better.
Yes.
An agenda that puts people at the front. But listen, I founded a group called the Lincoln Project.
Right.
The Lincoln Project played a decisive role in 2020. There are some advertising firms, and they measure this. They say this had $1 billion of impact. In the immediate aftermath, of course, what's effective is denounced by the progressive wing of the party. These people are losers. And I mean it. Right? It's their ideology is so obnoxious, so unpopular, the American people pick Trump. And so I'm going to give you two examples. We're talking about young men in your monologue. If you give half the country the power to point a finger at the other half of the country and destroy their life with an accusation, because one half of the country can never be wrong or tell a lie because of their gender, what do you think's going to happen when the other half of the country gets into a ballot box? So I'll give you a very specific example about two things. That Lincoln Project that was effective proves that every cause becomes a business, becomes a racket. On a 4-year basis, what it became, I had no part of it, 91 cents of every dollar pocketed by those guys. And then they'll be on the Stephanie Rule Show on MSNBC, grifting off the little old lady on Social Security.
Are you talking about the Lincoln Project?
I am.
I
I
didn't
am
realize that.
drifting off of the little old lady on MSNBC. Send more, send more, send more. Democracy. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
What I want to do, as I intimated to you in my email, was step back a bit. What is going on in the culture of this country slash the technology with which it parcels out attention and communication? Because I think those two things are joined. What is going on that has led us to this point, and how do you see us? Remember that last question I pitched you was, if you could stand in the future in 10 or 15 years, did we turn things around? Because we haven't solved a big problem in this country in a hell of a long time. We've lost all our wars, we've lost our crashes, and if we didn't turn things around, what do we do besides, never mind. But if we did, how did it happen? Sort of that imaginative thing. And I want to read you one quote before you start, because I want to get this in before the show's over. A few days after Trump's first election, I ran across this quote, and it has stuck with me ever since. It's from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. People need a vision that calls them. They need a future. They need MLK's dream. How are we going to turn things around? And what is our culture that it's bred all this distrust? George Packer, in his cover story in The Atlantic recently on Phoenix, which you may have seen, the point that stuck with me was he said they could solve water problems in 1980. It wasn't easy, but they did it. But they can't do it today. What's the difference? Back then, there were interests. There was an agricultural interest. There was a water interest. There was an environmental interest. Now there are enemies.
Well, listen, Dorothy Thompson, the legendary newswoman who's the first American to interview Adolf Hitler, the first American to be kicked out of Nazi Germany by Adolf Hitler, wrote in Harper's a brilliant essay, maybe the most brilliant of all time, called Guess Who's a Nazi, or Guess Who's Going to Go Nazi. And she talks about a degeneracy of the spirit and the character in the people. We of course, call these people the greatest generation. And the truth is, the greatest generation of Americans are not yet born. But there's something to realize, which is that half of all Americans who have ever lived are alive right now. There's only ever been 700 million Americans.
I heard you say
We're
that.
about to
That's amazing.
stand at 250 years of independence. I can show you pictures from 100 years ago of 100,000 Klansmen marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in full regalia. We have made incredible progress. The world we live in, its foremost architect was Franklin Roosevelt. What Donald Trump just did in his inaugural address was wipe away the Atlantic Charter and the UN Charter and the UN Declaration of Rights and 80 years of American values-led global leadership. And it will be much harder to get rid of it than he suspects because of the success of it. When the Spanish Prime Minister says, "Hey, Elon Musk, you're a threat to world peace," and the premise here that we stand for is democracy in Spain. Concept is not one tweet, one vote. It is one man, one vote. What that means is that within 250 years' time, a blink in the eye, in the space of human evolution and history, that a young man, a nobleman from France was right, the Marquis de Lafayette. At the moment that the country is born, at Yorktown, in command of troops, white flag goes up. This is it. We will win the revolution against the British Empire. And Lafayette says, humanity has its victory, liberty has its country. And he predicts that this country will save the world. And Lafayette says that country will save the world. And he predicts that it will be the beginning of the end of slavery, that though ironically, the momentum set in motion will find its way to the deep south of the United States last, and probably through civil war. And so the great architect of the modern era, Franklin Roosevelt, talking late into the night with his friend, the Canadian Prime Minister, lays out this vision of the future. And he says to him that nothing lasts forever. He just hopes that this world that is being imagined, like the United States was imagined into being, would last for as long as everybody who was alive on the day the war was won was still alive. The youngest of these people are 80 years. We have reached the end of the long lifespans of the survivors of the death camps and the liberators of the beaches and the towns and the villages. And so the lessons from the gravest crisis humanity ever faced, the memory, becomes our burden as it passes from lived memory to history. And so I want to talk about just a quick story.
Okay.
In World War II, the Allies, before they were the Allies, were known as the Associated Powers, which was not a particularly catchy title. And so Winston Churchill was in residence in the White House, and there's a great series of books about this that Nigel Hamilton wrote called the FDR Commander-in-Chief series. And Churchill had a young soldier, an aide-de-camp, who was on post outside of his bedroom when FDR came careening around the corner in his wheelchair and demanded entry into the prime minister's room. Churchill, when he had first arrived at the White House, had laid on every mattress in the place till he found the one that suited him, placed an enormous booze order, and took over the place. FDR barges into the room, and Churchill rises from his tub buck naked, and he says, "The Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." And Franklin Roosevelt says to him, "We shall call it the United Nations. We shall call it the United Nations." And so there's a vibrancy to American life. There are 100,000 elected governments across the United States, and they all have lawyers, and we have courts of law. This is the most complex society that has ever existed in all of human history. And so one of the things that we have that Alex de Tocqueville talked about as he traveled and observed America 200 years ago was the vibrancy of our civic and civil institutions. And one of them in 1945 is the League to Preserve the Redwoods in San Francisco, where the United Nations Peace Conference will be held as the European War ends. The Japanese War still rages. And there is this moment, this brief interregnum in humanity, in our affairs, where Nazism has been crushed, burned to the ground, and the first nuclear weapon has not yet been exploded. And it is the idea of the Redwood League to invite the President of the United States and for him to bring the delegates of the United Nations, not to assemble power in marble, but to bring power to God. Now, redwood is a very specific type of creation on Earth. It can really only ever die if it's murdered by the hand of man, deliberately. It can be burned and it regenerates. It is an ecosystem of life, and these trees, 1,000 years old. In this moment of history and possibility, peace, 100 million people dead, 6 million Jews murdered, 46 nations, the leaders of the peoples of the world who followed this great champion of freedom gather, but not for the conference to be led by Roosevelt, because Roosevelt has died on April the 12th. The last hour of his life, he is delighted like a schoolboy to be on the phone with the Postmaster General and to be invited to the unveiling of the United Nations stamp. The war is nearly won. Hitler has 18 days left to live. And so when the United Nations delegates gather on that day, what the plaque under those trees say is, here in this grove of enduring redwoods, preserved for posterity, members of the United Nations Conference on International Organization met on May 19th, 1945 to honor the memory of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 31st President of the United States, Chief Architect of the United Nations, and Apostle of lasting peace for all mankind. And this is what is coming to an end. We have come past the horizon of what this great man could see. If I could, I want to just read something to you.
Sure.
When one of the chief architects of the victory, freedom over slavery, man who served then in the rebuilding of the world, the Secretary of State, George Marshall, Secretary of Defense, position now inhabited by a drunk, a loathsome, and unfit man. This is what Harry Truman said about George Marshall. General Marshall was an honorable man, a truthful man, a man of ability. Honor has no modifying adjectives. Honor has no modifying adjectives. A man has it or he has not. General Marshall had it. Truth has no qualifying words to be attached to it. A man either tells the truth or he does not. General Marshall was the exemplification of the man of truth. Ability can be qualified. Some of us have little of it. Some may have moderate ability, and some men have it to the extreme. General Marshall was a man of the greatest ability. He was the man of honor, the man of truth, the man of the greatest ability. He was the greatest of the great in our time. I sincerely hope that when it comes my time to cross the great river, General Marshall will place me on his staff so that I may try to do for him what he did for me. And so when we look at Rosa Parks and we look at Dr. King and we look at John Lewis and we look at Barbara Jordan, we see indomitable people and we think there are no more indomitable people. But in the instant that those indomitable people rose, they rose from the same desert. And that's what everyone's got to understand. Right? What Donald Trump will smash will be gone. But we will meet him ahead at another hour of choosing that will be carved by his resolve and our opposition. And at that spot, on that day, we'll get another say. We got to get ready for that. And stop bullshitting each other. And so the Democratic Party must come back to life in the form of the FDR coalition, to stand for the proposition, the reestablishment of a social compact that if you play by the rules, you work hard, you get a good life. You get a good house. You have a job. You have the ability to live your life with dignity, to participate in your community, where you have time, where you don't do subsistence living, making 3 jobs, where the greatest, most powerful billionaires in the world say you're an employee, they aren't even employees. I guess they're just serfs. And so when we talk about FDR, where we're going, we came to all these lords and kings of his age to try to tear down capitalism, try to tear down democracy. What FDR said is, I welcome their hatred. I'll stand with you.
Yes.
And so ahead is a season of toughness, right? Toughness and resolve. And that's got to happen. And Democrats got to bring it. And the silly season's got to end. And the dishonest season's got to end.
Because it became a key point in there, I have to ask about one thing. I've said it before, and just in this conversation, I'm very critical of the Democratic Party. I certainly see no alternatives, sadly, because of our winner-take-all system. And, you know, there's things that make it impossible where other countries have multiple parties. We do not. But it is my feeling, sitting here somewhat on the sidelines, I was more involved years ago, but certainly engaged. It looks to me like those people who are woke, who are canceling, who are, as a number of people I've had conversations with over the last couple of years say, who make their biggest moves, their biggest battles in the world of language, not in what actually affects people's lives. It seems to me that they are not the party. I don't think of them as the party, even that party that I'm critical of. I think of them as the extreme fringe who's acting out either in the world of academia or the world of nonprofits or something, but they're not Bernie Sanders. They're not Ro Khanna. They're not Gretchen Whitmore. They're these extremists. And does it seem to you that it seems to me there's a couple of options? One is that I'm wrong, that they are the party and it's correct that they should be damned as so, or it doesn't matter because people perceive that is the party and it's and it is possible for, to spin it that way and so on. I mean,
people perceive it to be the weirdo party in the mainstream.
Why is that?
The core of it is around the issue of gender and women's sports. And I would encourage everybody to read the Andrew Sullivan column on this and the implications for gay men, for gay women. I ran, like I said at the beginning, marriage equality campaigns for the ACLU in part. The ad that Trump aired, Trump is for you, not they, them, is misunderstood, I think, as an attack on the transgender community. It is not.
No.
It is an attack on a dogma that a lot of people feel oppressed by, right? For example, where did the pronouns come from if you're a 48-year-old dude who's never seen or heard any of this before 2019? And I say to my progressive friends, right? Like, it's like some of whom, like, I love, right? Like in my life, right? And you say, I appreciate that somebody may like it or feel comfortable if I use the pronoun. If all of a sudden the meeting in the morning begins with a land acknowledgement and then the pronoun circle. But the fact that you're telling me I have to do this and it didn't exist a week ago, and I say this without anger for anyone, I offer this to understand. And people understand this. There is a big segment of the American population, and they are black and white and Hispanic, and they are male and female, and they are West Coast and East Coast, and they are North and South, and they are short and tall, and they are fat and thin, and their response to that is go fuck yourself.
So is mine.
Don't tell me what to do.
So is mine.
Right? And that insanity has become attached to the Democratic Party because
I want the because. Why?
The enforcement of the most stupid dogmas that play out on the cable news station, that plays out on the press conferences and on social media, that does not allow you to say, no, stupid, the black middle class guy needs the cop in his neighborhood to be safe from the criminal. Reforming the police is something we need to do with an urgent moral necessity, and all you care about is your slogan and your grift. And then the moral corruption of the Black Lives Matter movement on the day that the October 7th terror attack happens in Israel. Black Lives Matter puts up the Palestinian Hamas colors with a Hamas parasailer coming in. Are you shitting me? And the Democratic Party
Steve,
has not confronted the extremism in its midst. did not confront the gaslighting and the lying over Joe Biden. And the result is this fascist catastrophe
Okay,
forming
okay,
and
fine.
gathering.
I got the Biden lying, and I think one of the most brilliant whatever things you've said is that the Democratic ticket of Harris lost to the biggest liar in the history of the country on the issue of honesty because of the gaslighting of Biden's condition. I think that is absolutely true. What I'm saying is how how do how do we, you, me, rational progressives stop Black Lives Matter from putting up that thing? Or in other words, and let me just take one little ride here. I think we should have been in the streets over the mishandling of the pandemic. But instead, we go into the streets over the killing of George Floyd. Even that would have been okay if it was about police brutality, which we saw on screen. But no, it's about Black Lives Matter. Instead of being a universal, it becomes a narrow.
And it's about the media telling an audience that the protest is peaceful when the city is burning,
Yeah.
that the president is in great shape when the president.
Won't do his Super Bowl interview.
So there has to be a reestablishment of high standards. There's a story by one of the great political journalists working today, Gabriel De Benedetti, in New York Magazine about California politics and Kamala Harris. And in it, right after the greatest crisis again in the history of the state of California, Kamala Harris is in the story. Well, maybe she'll run for governor. Maybe she won't. You know, if she does run, all the people who are running, except for the former mayor of LA, will drop out of the race because that's what the system has produced, right? Successionist entitlement through term limits that it's my turn. So these aren't people who are running because they have ideas or convictions. They're running because it's their turn. And when you have enough people who've gotten into these offices because it's their turn to hold something that doesn't actually belong to them, belongs to the people listening to this, disaster's at hand. So there's no talk in the story, no reflection on the part of Kamala Harris. Why would you want to be the governor of California? Why would you want to lead the fifth largest state in the world? In fact, it's all presented as a consolation prize, a come down, right? And I guess you get the job and you start running for president right away again. Or the idea, the people around Kamala Harris, that she's the next Democratic candidate for president again. And the answer has to be no.
No, 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 no.
No. There must be somebody who can speak without a teleprompter. I mean, the best Democratic governor in the country right now is J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. And there are a lot of people who say, well, J.B. Pritzker's a billionaire. He can't run. Right? Franklin Roosevelt was a full-on aristocrat.
Yeah.
Who's tough enough, who's smart enough to confront Trump and beat Trump at his own game by having the wisdom of restraint to focus on the big things, not the stupid little ones. To be able to lay out for the American people the majesty, the beauty, the foundational ideas of this country and what's at stake. Peace, prosperity, be able to articulate something better. The Democratic voters better demand that. Let's say something about the Pete Hegseth piece and what Chuck Schumer should have done. And he didn't. You know, not everything happens on a speech on the Senate floor on cable news. But what should have happened is Chuck Schumer go in there and talk to his Republican colleagues and say, listen up, everybody. He's not getting through. What do you need? You tell me what you need from me. We're not putting this guy in charge of the U.S. Armed Forces. And let me tell you, if you do it, I'm going to make you pay for it. I'm going to raise the price to an unbearable point. Every day coming to this place to work will be in agony. I will use all my powers as the leader of the minority to grind this place to a halt. And you'll all say, Chuck, you're an asshole. And I'll say, maybe so, but I got the back of the 19-year-old private. They didn't do any of it.
Nope.
They rolled over. And when I point that out, there's a constituency of progressives and voters that are pissed off at me for pointing it out. Come on. There should be the deepest anger productively channeled to a reinvigoration of Americanism. That Franklin Roosevelt talked about, that Martin Luther King marched for, that holds that we're all created equally. And mission Democratic Party should be the building of the shining city on the hill that Winthrop saw, that John Kennedy reinvigorated, that Ronald Reagan prophesied, that Dr. King saw from the mountaintop. That's what the party has to be. And so it's a long way from being, but coming to be starts with one step in the right direction. And that's what you want to see.
And that step, I'm guessing, is telling the truth about
telling the truth.
Telling the truth about where we are and what's needed. And you know, I just got to say a couple of things. That thing about the entitled one, the one who's next, I was thinking about it. That's Dole. He lost. That's Hillary. She lost. That's Harris. She lost. That's McCain. He lost. The ones who win come from nowhere. Yeah. Who the hell is Bill Clinton? Who the hell is Barack Obama? Who the hell is, you know, this actor who's running for governor of California? You know, it's not the chain of command.
This whole Democratic Party orthodoxy. Your viewers don't know how Democrats make ads, but it's like something you would imagine out of East Germany in 1978, right? For the dictator's birthday month. And it produces vanilla farina crapola, all of these data experts. It's a scam. The chicken entrails would work better. You have 4 or 5 advertising firms that are worth anything in the Democratic Party, right? But you got Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. You got some of the greatest storytellers in the world that are avid partisan Democrats. And no one says to these guys, tell a story for Christ's sakes, right? Because a corrupt establishment is strangling this institution when we need it. And so when you watch CNN, right, you wonder how the party can be so out of touch. Right? I was talking to a friend of mine in LA as a director, and you know, he was like, you know, the Republicans don't represent the interests of the working man, which is certainly true. But I said to him, how many welders do you think work at the DNC? How many plumbers? There are no plumbers.
No.
There's lots of woke, condescending millennials. And so everybody kind of looks at CNN. You're like, why is it imploding? I'll tell you why. Because you have the same 25 smug assholes who all live within 2 square miles of one another and see each other during the normal course of a week 52 times at book parties to brunches to White House correspondents' dinners. That's why. No one believes a word. No one wants to hear a word. None of those people are on your side. They're all a version of Scott Jennings.
Ooh.
Right? If you are sitting there with Scott Jennings in this theater of the absurd every night, you're just another malignant puppet. That's the truth.
Yeah. I gotta let you go, Steve. Obviously, there's so much here, so much here. Thank you for for telling it like you see it. I don't agree with everything you said in this hour, but I certainly agree with where you're coming from and the passion with which the. I mean, one thing that is that Trump, by being an outlaw, made the Democrats defend the establishment, and 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 that they do all too well, and it's losing
Democrats would do well to watch the Wyatt Earp documentary on Netflix.
Huh?
A lot of people might look at Wyatt Earp and say, he's a bit much. Democrats could use a modern version of a Wyatt Earp.
All right.
Donald Trump is a lot of things. He's the biggest scumbag in the ring, and he will always squash a lesser scumbag. What defeats a scumbag is an honorable man.
That's right.
There's a great short story in American literature by Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Great Stone Face. And that's about Waterville Valley. That's about the great old man in the mountain in New Hampshire. Read that Hawthorne story, because that's what Democrats are in search of. Man or woman, the honorable leader. And this country, almost providentially, has produced them.
Yeah.
In the right moments, at the right places, at the right time. So that's what we got to hope for.
And I'm going to ask you one other thing, because it always strikes me. America loves charismatic optimists. You've worked for some of them. It starts with the Roosevelts, JFK, RFK, MLK, Reagan. Even Bush had a bit of it. Clinton, Obama. Trump breaks the mold. He's the charismatic apocalyptor. It's weird. But the fact that 3 of them were assassinated within 5 years, I don't think people acknowledge how much that changed the arc of this country and the world.
Sure did.
Yeah. Okay, man. Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve Schmidt. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Again, you can find Steve on steveschmidt.substack.com. Steve, Steve, Schmidt, SCHMIDT, Steve Schmidt.substack.com, or The Warning with Steve Schmidt on YouTube. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually 10 or 15 links to articles to flesh out the conversation, timely, relevant, good news, bad news, email me at temcnally@mac.com, TEMCNALLY@mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast at my site, at Apple Podcast, at most podcast sites. You'll find years of podcasts there. Michael Lewis, Naomi Klein, Bill McKibben, Van Jones, Connie Rice, Greg Boyle, George Packer. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Keanu Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners, please share this podcast widely.